Vance Morris, what's your superpower and how does that serve your mission to help others?
Man, my superpower is I notice things. And like everything, you got a dusty house plant, you got a spoon on the floor in your restaurant. I notice these things. It makes it difficult to go out to eat, I can tell you that. But that's what I use to help my clients and my coaching members is through being able to notice things, the details. And that really came from my background at Disney, since they are fanatical about attention to detail.
Cadell, what's a story from your experience that comes to mind that exemplifies exceptional or unique styles in leadership?
Sure. Really coming from my Disney background, a couple of my boss, Lee Cockrell, wrote an incredible, it's not a book, it's a document, I guess, or white paper, called Great Leaders Strategies. And that was kind of the blueprint for all of the Disney leaders to use. This is back in the 90s, and it's still in use today. That's how strong it was. I don't want to say there was anything earth-shattering in it, but it was all of the, walk in their shoes kinds of things. It was, don't ask things that you wouldn't actually do yourself. And really looking at other businesses or at Disney, it was other units within the Disney company for different areas of leadership. Innovation actually was one of the areas that they pointed to me for, because I was on the design team of a number of the attractions and restaurants there at Disney. They would go to George Miliotis at the California Grill for inclusion, and not in the words of DEI these days, but in the words of how do you get your employees or your cast members engaged in the decision making and operations of a business unit.
Flywheel leadership is about discovering and practicing the leadership systems that bring out the best in each of us and our teams. A couple of phrases that are really powerful from your work, Vance: extraordinary experiences, attracting ideal customers through engaged employees. Could you share a little bit more about what you mean by those?
Sure. So let's take the engaged employees piece, because especially for anybody that actually has them, this will be very instructive. So one of the most powerful things that I do during consulting and brainstorming with clients is getting the employees in on the brainstorming, because they do the job day in and day out. Quick example would be I worked with an Allstate insurance guy. I can't remember what town he was in, but he had like 7 other Allstates in his city, not to mention like the 25 or 30 or 50 other insurance agents. And he had to find a way to stand out because he was just a commodity. And so when we were going through the brainstorming session, we mapped out his entire customer journey, which, as boring as that might sound, is a vital piece to anybody doing anything. And we found that the most important part of that customer journey was the phone call, the initial call in to his agency. And he was a rock and roll fanatic. I mean, he had gold records on the wall, autographed guitars, the posters of The Who and Led Zeppelin and all that. And his receptionist said we should really lean into that whole rock and roll persona. And so she actually came up with the way to answer the phone. So normally if you call pretty much any business, you get, thank you for calling ABC Company. How can I help you?
Right.
We've all heard that 1,000 times. But now when you call this insurance agency, they answer the phone like a rock and roll DJ. Thank you for calling Dave's Allstate, the agency that rocks. And, it sounds corny like the first 17 times you say it, but it really if you remember, your marketing's supposed to do two things, attract the people you want and repel the people you don't want. And just by answering the phone that way, they sift, sorted, and screened out, anybody who would just not be a good client. On a larger scale, Disney, and I learned this from Disney, is they really rely on the employees for operational improvements. I don't know if you've ever been to the Magic Kingdom, but if you take that paddle wheel boat from the parking lot over to the theme park, up until a couple of years ago, they loaded it from the first floor only. You walked down a ramp and you got on the boat, and then some people went upstairs and some people, stayed on the first floor. And one employee just pretty much out of the blue said, if we could load this on the on both floors at the same time, first and second floor, we could probably get in, 4, 5, 6 more trips across the bay, improving, the guest experience. And so based on that suggestion, they built a gangplank where they now load both the second and first floors of the steamship. And this was all a employee's idea. So you got to go to your employees if you really want to have, really good operational change. And once they feel like they're being heard and listened to and ideas are acted upon, now you have engaged employees. And when you have that, your turnover is really low and your guest service is probably really high.
Certainly. I would like to understand more about you and your story. Like, what's the core work that you do for your clients with Deliver Service Now?
Sure. So we focus primarily on what to do with a customer once you got them and how to keep them, for lack of a more eloquent answer. I don't do anything with lead generation or Google ads or any of that stuff. Just not my wheelhouse. But once you have the customer, that's where I take over. And so the end goal is to have customers for a lifetime. And how do we achieve that? And it needs to start with the first interaction you have with the customer. So again, going back to the customer journey. And there's really nothing extraordinary about what companies can do. It's taking the boring, mundane things that we have to do day in and day out in our business. Disney has figured this all out and create an experience out of those. So I mentioned, answering the telephone. Okay, great. That's creating an experience out of the mundane. And that's what I really work with. And in tune with that is creating emotional connections with our customers. I'm not saying you got to go on dates with them or anything like that. But if you think about Disney or Apple or Harley Davidson, these are all companies that people are fanatically rabid, emotionally connected to these brands. I mean, Google comes out with a new phone and, you might have one person in the Verizon store. Apple comes out with a new phone and there's, 1,000 people wrapped around the block waiting to get the thing. That is a rabid fan base. And so how do our Main Street businesses, how do we create those strong emotional connections so that they will literally drive by a competitor to get to you? I worked with a group of oil change places, kind of like a Jiffy Lube, Quick Lube, but they were independent. He actually had a Jiffy Lube 2 doors down from him. And he was high commodity business, and he was having a tough time standing out. Every time they ran a coupon, he ran a coupon, and it was a race to the bottom. So I said, well, the only other direction you can go from down is up, because there's no competitive advantage to being second cheapest. So we turned his oil change place into a 1950s style service station. The guys came out in white shirts and bow ties, little gloves, and one guy squeegees your windshield, the other one checks the air pressure in your tire, and one guy escorts you into the waiting room where there's actually today's newspaper and, a barista waiting to make your favorite coffee drink. And so it's all the things I just said are things that he has to do for the oil change, right? He needs employees in uniform. So we just took them out of the coveralls and we got uniforms that were white shirts and bow ties. The waiting room, we all have to wait in the waiting room. Usually that's painful because the coffee is stale and the magazine is from the 40s. And so we just changed those little things. And really, his biggest expense was the espresso machine. But aside from that, there was really no expense to creating these experiences. And that's what people need to understand is you don't need to spend a lot of money in infrastructure. You don't need a Cinderella castle or anything like that to create the experience. You just need to have a different mindset.
Vance, I see the tie-in of noticing things to delivering that client experience, right? There's so many things, especially when you've been running an operation, a business for a while, that you don't see. And you need that outsider's perspective to come in and it's usually very plain to the naked eye. It doesn't take a whole lot of uncovering, but it's really hard to see when you're in the thick of it day in and day out. So that brings so much value to leaders and owners and founders. And then client retention, I've been passionate about that my entire career. I've seen so much attention to business development for good reason, of course, but I've seen so much where it's the dollars and logos of those new clients that are so desired and so little focus on actually taking care of the current clients that are actually paying the bills right now today and will be if we take care of them, right?
Yeah.
Those are the clients that we already have and we should be focusing on. You can still go out and win new business, but those current clients are often the ones that win you the new business. Yeah. So any thoughts on that right there?
Yeah, well, I think we've been brainwashed as business owners into, that shiny object syndrome. We always got to have new, more. And, if you look at, the phone companies, they'll offer, new customers, pretty much an open checkbook, just switch from their current one to, here's the new phone, we'll pay off your old phone, yada. And schlubs that have been around for a while, we don't get any of that. And so I look at, and also, if you think about what it costs a phone company to get somebody to change, that's expensive. And customer acquisition, getting a new client is a very expensive venture. I own a number of home service businesses here in Maryland, and it cost me $136 to get a new customer in the front door. That's pay-per-click ads, guy answering the phone, everything all in. Only cost me $23 a year to keep a customer. So the minute we serve an existing one, we're immediately more profitable. We already have the know, like, trust. Word of mouth marketing, referrals, etc. And the ratio I like to use is 80-20. If you went to Disney today, 80% of the people in the park right now have been there before. It's only 20% new. Now, if that ratio is good enough for Disney, it's good enough for us. So with my clients, with my own businesses, that 80% is the benchmark that we're trying to achieve. Because one, you still have growth. So you have that 20% new. So you have the growth you're looking for, but you have profitable growth because you're not, you could be really, really busy and be broke because all you're doing is getting new clients and not keeping the old ones. So I would much prefer to, not slow down the growth, but manage the growth, but also make sure that I'm profitable by paying attention to my existing customers.
So Vance, when you're looking at a business and you're trying to help that owner or leader improve their client retention, can you walk us through the types of conversations, the observations you're making, how you assess the business and how you recommend something?
Sure. A quick story. Actually, I got this client because they actually did work at my house. It was an HVAC company. And one summer, the air conditioning didn't click on. So, went to Google, called the first one on the list, came out. They did a marvelous job. Just freaking fantastic job. Treated my home with respect, put little booties on their shoes, explained the problems like I would understand them because I'm not a mechanical guy. and just did a great job. And then about 18 months later, first cold day, the heat didn't click on. So I'm like, oh, crap. So I'm looking around. I wanted to call this company back. I could not find an invoice, a business card. They hadn't put a little magnet on the unit or anything. And so I had to go back to Google to find another company. I may have even called the same company. But had they had just sent, maybe every other month postcard or, an email or a newsletter, they would have been immediately top of mind, and I would have called them. And I've told this story a number of times, and the HVAC company that first came out called me and said, I think you're talking about us. And I'm like, oh, well, what gave that away? Because we don't do any of the stuff you just talked about. So I picked them up as a client, and their retention their cost of acquisition went down, and their profitability certainly went up. So you have to put into place things that will remind people that you're around, because it's not the customer's job to remember you. It's your job as the business owner to remind customers that you exist. Long gone are the days when there was just one plumber in town, and everybody remembered it because there was only one. Now with the internet and 16 plumbers in your town, hey, what are you going to do to separate yourself from everybody else? And how are you going to literally build a titanium fence around your customers, keeping them in and your competitors out? So I could both other strategies, tactics, however you want to go next.
So Vance, what's the difference between reminding people or making them, like, spurring their remembering about your business versus being that annoying, like almost so annoying that you don't want to hear about it anymore and you'd rather not work with them? Like, where's that balance? Like, how do you kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah. So I think you need to balance it with delivering value, entertainment, and then what I call quiet offers. Because, if the only time you ever hear from a company is when they want your money, that's transaction, that's not relationship. And so you have to balance what the messages you're sending out with not always asking for money. So on a monthly basis, this is the system I've used now for 16 years in my own businesses and the one that I teach everybody. And so you don't have to pay my fee to get this. I'm just going to tell it to you. So one thing you want to do is create a newsletter, preferably in print, that goes through the mail. Postal Service has got the best deliverability rate over any internet provider, so they're still at about 99%. Say what you will about them. Two, it's something physical that they get to hold on to. So they're using other senses. It's not an easily deleted thing or getting filtered somewhere to a promotion box or spam box. They actually have to hold on to the thing, look at it, and decide, okay, do I want to read this or am I just going to chuck it? And if it's designed properly in a entertaining way, I kind of call it Reader's Digest Light. I don't know if your listeners are my age or really young, but Reader's Digest was this magazine. I will get into that. But you want to entertain. And you also want to continue the emotional connection. So one of the things I do in my business is I shamelessly use my children in my marketing. I have no problem with it. And when my daughter was doing ballet, I would take pictures of her at her recital. She's in her little tutu and, everybody thought, oh, she's cute. I would take that picture. I put it in my monthly newsletter. And so my customers, watched my children grow up. And we were in the grocery store one day with my daughter, and this lady came running up to us saying, oh my God, Emma, how was your recital? And, we both wanted to run and hide in the frozen food section, but I had to think, wait, she's one of my customers. She gets the newsletter. She's watched my child grow up. She's never leaving me. She's either going to have to move or die before I ever lose her. And so it's that kind of emotional connection, that powerful connection that's going to keep customers for life. And you can do this B2B. You can do this B2C, D2C, whatever acronym you want to use, it works everywhere. And so in the newsletter, again, it's entertaining. You might have a very soft offer like, hey, if you have any friends or neighbors that might need our services, give us a call. You add to that a monthly postcard. Now, again, this is in the mail, but the postcard acts as your monthly offer. So it's got a little entertainment, maybe something funny on the front, something that'll stand out. But then you make your offer, and then you back that up with a weekly email. And I'm a big fan of not having to do duplicate work. So you just take the stories from the newsletter, put it in the email, take the offer from the postcard, put it in the email. Now you got a weekly email that you can send out. So you're hitting people not only digitally, but analog. And this is what's gotten me. We're not quite at 80%. We're at about, last year total, we were at 71% repeat clients in my home service businesses here in Maryland. So the system works.
I love hearing your work being applied to your own business as well, not just to other businesses. So you've seen it.
Yeah, I didn't go to consultant school and get the little consultant diploma. I've been around the block a couple times.
That's great. So what's one thing you've changed your mind on over the span of your life or career?
Well, I make a lousy employee. I don't like to be told what to do, which is probably why I have my own businesses. And it took a while to get there, though. I mean, I had to get fired a couple of times from some pretty high profile jobs. One was I was director of catering for Smithsonian Museum System in DC. And, that one hurt, but it made me realize I'm just not employable. And I think what kept me at Disney for 10 years was the fact that it was always something new because I was designing and implementing and designing and implementing. I didn't really have to stick around to operate the thing. And I think that's where I get bored. So that was really an eye-opener, that whole employability thing.
Vance, what's the difference you see in the leaders that really excel versus the ones that really struggle with leading their business?
Well, I think they don't reach out for help. Now, I am not a leadership guy, so I'm not trying to sell my services here, but finding, whether they're living or dead, a mentor who can help you in transition from, especially if you were the only employee and now you have a team, or you're brought in as a new leader and you haven't worked with a team before, finding help with whatever it is that you're doing is top of the list. Find a mentor, find an advisor who can teach you those things, about leadership. I never met Napoleon Hill, but I consider him a mentor. I mean, the guy died, 50 years ago. But I still read all his stuff and absorb it. Same thing with Dan Kennedy and I lost the other guy's name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Find somebody who can help you. Really, I think that's the biggest thing I could say on that.
That's great. Vance, as leaders are looking to really instill that magic with the client journey, the customer journey, and really find what works for their own business, where do you suggest they start?
Sure. Well, I mentioned at the beginning the client journey and mapping it out. So first point of contact, and there's really no end because you're going to continue to market to them, and hopefully you'll serve them for a lifetime. So you take each one of those points and you figure out, okay, how do we make an experience out of this? And you want to look at what's going to get you the most bang for your buck. So it might be point number 7 is like, this is the point where we really fall down. We need to focus on this. The other thing you need to look at are the periods in between those points, because you do this from the point of view of the customer. So if, a office meeting is the first touch, and then you've got to do a proposal or get some information together, and the second touch is not going to happen for 2 or 3 weeks, well, you're working, but your customer is what? Waiting. they're sitting there, they're doing nothing, and they have time to think about, was this a good decision? Buyer's remorse and things like that. So I take a cue from Disney where they entertain you while you wait. So if you go to Disney, you wait. That's kind of the thing you do there, and you wait in line for the attraction. But what they do is they entertain you in the line. Part of being in line is part of the experience. So, I mean, there might be characters in there. If you go to the Haunted Mansion, there's talking tombstones and all that kind of stuff. So I take that and say, okay, how do we apply that to businesses that don't have a Cinderella castle? And so, so if you have meeting and you've got 2 weeks to second meeting, what are you doing? So I encourage people to, one, certainly, email them a couple of times, giving them updates. If it's something that's being delivered, UPS and FedEx have these great tracking mechanisms that you can email to your client and literally follow the package as it's getting delivered. You get updates. And then you also want to send things that are going to reinforce the sale. So have you written a book? If you have, great. The minute that first meeting's over, get your book in the mail. Do you have a newsletter? Great. Get that thing in the mail. You want to remind them that you're still around and you're still working. Even if it's just something as simple as a few emails saying, yep, I got your stuff. I'm working. Don't forget our next meeting is coming up, in 2 weeks. It's that wait period that's vital, I think, for every business.
Vance, you mentioned something that just really stood out for me, that you talk about the experience again, and just one thing that leaders or owners can really take away, whether it's leading your own team or having that customer experience, is everything is part of that experience. Whether you're standing in line or you're waiting on information or whatever applies to your business, everything is part of the experience, not just that end delivery point where you're giving them the service or product, right? And I think that's something that we can all remember a little bit better in our journey with our employees or clients, right?
Right. And the other place that people fall down is that once you got their money, then you forget about them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you go in, if you're going into a clothing store, you want to buy, you're going to buy some shirts. There's probably somebody at the front door greeting you, maybe even pestering you. And then they'll help you choose your clothing. And then they'll, of course, they want to check you out and get your money. But then what happens? Does anybody hold the door for you to let you out? Or does the greeter say anything? We got your money now. The heck with you, is really the message that we're sending. So, once you get the check or the credit card, that's the most crucial point in which to reinforce the sale, the good decision that they've made, and how you're going to follow up with them in the future. So, yeah, I mean, it's not just that transaction point, where money's exchanged. It's everything leading up to it. And what people forget is everything that happens afterwards.
Certainly. Vance, what have we missed that we should talk about?
Oh, wow. We mentioned quickly at the beginning, attention to detail and my superpower of noticing things. And when I was at Disney, they still use this term. It's everything speaks. Okay. So every detail in your business is saying something about it. And if you think of a detail, there is no middle ground. It's either enhancing or detracting from the experience. You can't be neutral. So the dusty houseplant, well, that's detracting. The friendly greeter at the host stand of the restaurant, that's enhancing. There is no middle ground. So you have to look at every detail. I mean, if you're a dentist and you've got dusty houseplants, well, geez, what's the message? That thing you're going to be sticking in my mouth, is that thing clean? So think about it as everything speaks. If you got a website, I mean, when was the last time you went through it as a customer to make sure there's no broken links or codes work or whatever? It's really that fanatical attention to detail that has made Disney successful, Apple successful. If you haven't read the Steve Jobs biography, it's amazing. And it's because he wanted the inside of the computer to look great, not just the outside of the computer. That's a fanatical attention to detail. And I think that is what most business owners really need to wrap their heads around is they can't manage every detail, but they got to choose the details that are important so that they can, what I would say, overmanage those.
Certainly. Before we wrap, what do you want those you have worked with to say about your impact on them?
That it was life-changing. Excuse me. And I don't say that to inflate my own ego. I've had a financial advisor client now. He's been with me 2.5 years. He was at an event with me last week. And he said, Vance, I have quintupled my fees since I've known you in the last 2.5 years. And the impact that has had on not only my business, my employees, but my family. Instead of getting loans out for college, we just paid for college for our son. Instead of waiting another year for a car or going on a vacation, we've been able to do those things. And, I always hate to bring it back to money, but I mean, that's why we are in business. I mean, Disney is a money-making company. And so, I think that, the changes that, I can affect not only in people's businesses, but in their lives through the stuff that I can teach is fulfilling, and I enjoy it.
Powerful stuff. How can listeners best find you or follow you in your mission?
I appreciate that. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's the only social media I do. Vance Morris. I think there's only one of me. And then I do have a gift for everybody. It's called 52 Ways to Wow Your Customer. And so it's one wow for every week of the year for you. So if you're not feeling overly creative, you can take those, and you can find that at wow52ways.com.
Great. Thank you. We'll have that in the show notes as well. Vance Morris, Deliver Service Now. Thank you for sharing today. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Graham.
Take care.